that Digital Smoke Signals is live streaming from. Na nania ohoba chinami na agatika diapa na ohoba chinami na tabo nania Myron Dewey na Yaruwa Kuna Punii and Punii, which is, this is Myron Dewey from Digital Smoke Signals, coming from Paiute territory out here in Nevada. And I'm going to come to you live, and we're going to talk about a few things today. One of them is this new app called HAPS. That'll be the first topic. The second topic is going to be drones for good, and what Digital Smoke Signals has been using drones for good for the past 6 years. And one of the drones is right behind me. Drones for good is Phantom 2 was one of the first drones used. And so I went over a lot of media, a lot of tutorials in the last several years, and documentary was done on drones, as well as a New York Drone Film Festival award that was won. And from that point on, using drones from good started back in 2014 and still going 15, 16, 2017, 18, 19, and 2020, and stepping it up into using the Cinna drone. Cinna, it's a FTP drone, and it's extremely fast, and that's the drone Digital Smoke Signals myself will be using from here on, along with the Phantom, the Mavic Pro Zoom. So in my location here in Paiute territory, I call it the digital divide. If you have a cellular phone, you're going to be lucky to get texts on time, or sometimes your calls go to voicemail. Surprisingly, I've done a lot of site survey testing with different apps and different live stream programs and platforms. Earlier I was using Amiivo, which is this little guy right here. It lets you live stream, and it's more of a corporate use. It's extremely hard because it wouldn't establish the wireless connection very clear. Why am I going over these different platforms with wireless, with hardware, with drones for good? Why? Because in my homelands, I use drones to protect the sacred, the water, the land, the community, the most vulnerable, the animals, the children. Using live streams is basically indigenizing life the way we see live streams. I'm looking at one right now, and I'm monitoring, kind of where this is going with Smoke Signals, where it's going on the different platforms. It's also on Twitter. It's also on Drones for Good. It's on Digital Smoke Signals, and it's on my personal Facebook page. It's streaming to YouTube Live as well. And there was, I think the closest that I can get to it is the Mevo, which just added Periscope. It also has Periscope, but it goes to LinkedIn as well. And so these are the type of tools that we're really looking for in Indian country to help articulate the issues we're trying to protect, because all throughout Indian country, tribal members are getting arrested and trespassing in their own homelands, trying to protect their areas from corporate extraction, Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, forest deforestation, and corporate harvesters, and bringing in people from out of the country to do over harvesting our traditional lands, to agricultural cleansing, meaning farmers that desecrate sacred sites to put in farmland, and also as well as corporations, oil companies, gas companies, and so on. These are the things, as constant encroachment around our homelands. Now, most of our people consider themselves protectors. This isn't the lifestyle that I think we're trying to choose. We're also storytellers. And as you're seeing here, Digital Smoke Signals started from digital storytelling and my background in technology and wildland firefighting. And that's how the name Digital Smoke Signals came to be, as I was sitting on a mountain watching two fires come together, two smokes. Complexes is what they're called when they go over a certain amount of acreage. And that message to be carried out. And so these platforms are very important. They need to be used in ways where we can help articulate the language. If we're doing digital language preservation, we can help articulate um, protecting sacred sites from fiber optics coming through, which is most throughout the country. Most tribes have what's called cultural monitors, and those cultural monitors are coming forward, and they walk in front of the machinery. And in front of the machinery, what they're doing is checking to make sure that those machineries don't hit sacred sites, the bones of our ancestors, in which many of these roads cross, that there's been no accountability over the last, since first contact, I would say, just in my own homelands 180 years ago in Nevada. So there's so much to educate, there's so much to go forward and share why we're protecting the land, why we're protecting the water, why we're protecting our traditional harvesting areas, why we're using technology for good, using drones for good, digital language preservation, using apps, using Facebook. I have a page on Facebook where been using for the last 4 years, 5 years actually, creating a digital archive for the solution in my own community. We don't have a language program in our community. We have a few people doing the language, but we don't have a language program like we used to. And I remember a long time ago, I had a contract with the tribe to do language creation. And during that time, I was actually spending my whole time doing Computers 101 with the person that should have been doing language preservation. And it stole time. And that's how I got into doing Computers 101 and also being a professor doing Computers 101. And I started working with solutions along the lines of what I seen that we needed for our tribe and the different tribes throughout any country that I traveled. My undergrad is from Haskell Indian Nations University. It's an all native university from tribes all over the country. And it's pretty powerful to have those degrees and native teachers, native programs for you, for your tribe, for your community initiative, for whatever it is that you're trying to do. It's beautiful. It's amazing to be surrounded around like-minded thinkers. People share their story. They share their story on why they're going to the university. They could have just found out that they were from a tribe. They could have can't afford the current education in throughout the like Harvard or Big 12 colleges, for all reasons. Sometimes we just learn better with our own people, the same struggles. But we also have a unique struggle. Is education for Indigenous people was weaponized at the turn of the century. And it was a policy called kill the Indian to save the man. And churches were contracted, contractors were contracted. And there was a lot of money involved in disconnecting Indigenous people from the land. The Indian wars were too much. This was our lifestyle, to be warriors, to use the tools that we had to survive daily. And when it came to warfare, it was very natural for our people to protect. And so those were the stages as this country was doing land theft, all the way starting from New York, all the way across Martha's Vineyard, New York, North Carolina, where the Trail of Tears started with the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Seminoles. There was so much happening with tribes as also Western culture was fighting over indigenous land with other countries, other people, their own people. During those times, land extraction was still happening. Timber sales were happening. The search for gold was happening as Lewis and Clark was shooting across, scouting for land theft. That is the history into Shoshone territory, into our territory, in Paiute territory, Shoshone territory. And a lot of promises were made during the land of the tribes that were never honored or kept. And that was the first documented broken promises along the way down towards our homelands in Paiute territory, Shoshone territory. These are the things that we've had to live with since first contact in our communities. And these are also the parts of history that never get taught in the high schools. This is why I really push myself to become a professor, is to help articulate that on one side for the Americans, it's American dream. On the other side, for Indigenous people, it's American Holocaust of history, the horror of history, wrapped up into a nice little package called the American dream. And the extraction that most of the tribes worry about across the United States is corporate mining or deforestation from the state, or contractors that come in and are working under subsidiaries and LLC corporations and not being held accountable legally by the state because they can't find them, or oil companies coming in and millions of uncapped wells that are all throughout the United States from drilling. And these are the things that tribes in their own homelands have to protect, because our laws are different. We're in federal law, Indian law, and it's complicated and you know, it's made to be complicated. And right now what we're trying to do is protect our homelands still with what we have. So using drones for good, using these platforms to protect the sacred and help educate also on the historical trauma of not just Indigenous people, but it's historical trauma of the land. And we see the land as our mother through Indigenous eyes. This is our mother. Our mother takes care of us. Our mother provides for us. And as human beings, we were all born of water, sacred water from our mother. And we drink that water from the land, our mother, Mother Earth. Very simple. It's not mystical. It's none of those things. This is just part of the natural law of every single human being on the planet. The problem that's happened is that Western culture has removed themselves from that sacred circle, and they're on the outside of it. Now, most of us humans are on this inside of that sacred circle. We understand the relationship between the land. We understand the relationship between us and our food source, and to not over harvest it, not to kill the land off. And we become one with that land when when we have those resources. We do. And when we don't, we struggle. We become dependent. And the dependency started in my tribe with the commodities, government rations that were given out during the prisoner of war camp. And this is a little bit of history I'll give you guys. This is a little bit of the history that's really caused our people the nutritional genocide, as it's documented, with the gluten, the flour, the milk, the sugar, the salt, all of the things that we don't eat. Western culture does. And it's caused a lot of heart disease and high blood pressure and diabetes and cancers in our community. And it's just one of those things that has been harder. It's also an addiction. Sugar is an addiction, and it's in different forms of addiction. And you can see it in our community, struggling with also obesity as well, and dementia and things that we never had. We never had these sicknesses in our community. As we move fast forward to COVID, this is not a new sickness for us when it comes to the biological warfare that was used with smallpox and measles to Indigenous people, which was military strategy to remove us from the land. A little bit of 101 of Indigenous history for you there. Then you fast forward it to the Spanish flu and 1918, and in my tribe, our areas, they try to blame it on the Paiute people. and the Shoshone people and the Washoe people here, and confined prison. Pretty much, we were confined on the reservations, and in our own homelands, we were prisoners in our own homelands. This is just a little bit of the history I'm sharing with you that you can easily Google and find. I want to be that conduit of energy from one place to another that helps you find that information that you can look up and help you articulate, because these are things that you have not been taught in grade school, middle school, high school. Colleges are now doing it. Last year, I was a professor at Duke University and the University of North Carolina, and it was really an eye opener. During that time at Duke University, we got there. The native students did not have a place in the annex like all the other students on campus. The original people of the land. There was quite a bit of native people from that was their homeland. And I learned a lot from the native students as well as the non-native. They had shared we did some research on how Durham and the college and the surrounding areas have gotten wealthy off of tobacco, the tribes resource, and moved them off of the land. And some of the students, had a hard time with the history because they never talked about their traditional lineage as far back as you can go from first contact. From were they political refugees, were they religious refugees, were they criminals shipped over from Europe, or were they part from another country? They didn't know, and half of my students did. Over half actually knew. Now it depend, because at Duke, most of my students were native, and at University of North Carolina, it was only had 2 native students, and the half of the class was non-native, and the other half was my Black students, and we had a couple of international students, which when we did land acknowledgement, they knew exactly where their homeland was, where their people came from, and so far back. It was amazing. It's like I felt like the relationship to the earth was so clear between us and them. They had it fresh in their mind out from Africa. And the Black students that were there really struggled with that because they didn't have that tie to their motherland. Although they knew they were from there, it was taken from them. It was extracted intellectually through manipulation and slavery and so forth. The PTSD and the attack on their DNA, just like us as Indigenous people. So it's able to explain those things, but we also started with the healing circle. So you heard me in the beginning when I started off with my language. It's part of that prayer, and not religiously prayer. It is an acknowledgement that what I'm saying to you with my language is that is an act of not just me speaking my language, but it's an act of resistance. And there was a time in my homelands here in Stewart, boarding school here, Carson City, our people could not speak the language. And so this is just a little bit of an overview of why I do the work that I do, and educating with historical trauma training, with drones, using drones for good, using live streams for good, and not weaponizing these, but to say, here's what's happening in our homelands, and here's when you do land acknowledgement and acknowledge the land, acknowledge your people and your relatives as far back as you can go. You honor yourself, and that's what we continue to do and try to do. Now, I wasn't always at this place. I've been down a hard road myself and trying to regain the language, regain the culture, Numa Yadawa, which is talking Paiute, and Nuadagwa, which is talking Shoshone. I'm Numa and Noah. I'm Numa and Noah, which is Paiute Shoshone. I'm also, on my dad's side, Tamok Shoshone, and Agaitika, which is called Trout Eaters. And it goes far back. On my dad's side as well, my family is from Yosemite, which there is no more Paiute people living in Yosemite. Now, his mom is from Shures here, Agaitika, 100%. And there's a lot we're learning along the way to the displacement, the displacement of the land out in Yosemite in the Sierras was for water. And that water goes to you guys down in LA, you Hollywood guys. Those of you guys in LA watching this, you get our Paiute water. The city kills it several times over, trying to sterilize it and clean it and whatnot. But it is pure as you can possibly get. If you don't believe me, head up towards Bishop area. You'll see those pipelines coming out of the Sierras all the way down to Mammoth, all the way down to certain areas. And they've dried out that valley. You guys have dried out that valley. Water is sacred. Why do we say water is sacred and water is life? It's because we were born of water. And without it, you wouldn't make it. Your body would shrivel up. Your mind would go. Your vision, your tears would get real salty. Things would change in your body. Don't believe me, don't drink water for 30 days. Give it a try. But that's what, this live feed is. Hopefully will give you a little bit of understanding of why Indigenous people are sharing their story in protecting the sacred, protecting the water, protecting the land. The historical trauma that comes with that as well. The anger sometimes that not everyone can articulate the anger. Not everyone can articulate the pain and the struggle. And yes, sometimes it gets projected out, that anger. And that's a hard place, because you may not understand that. Living guilt-free on Indigenous land, you may not understand that. And of course, I'm not blaming you. I know what you're feeling. Probably feeling, well, I didn't do those things. And you're right. You did not do those things. But you do benefit from all of the rape, murder, and genocide, extraction of minerals from tribes, extraction of resources. You benefit from all of that history. And that's the history of America. Indigenous people are the reminders of that history. And it is a really horrible and horrific history. Now, it goes even deeper. And we have Indigenous people in the city. You may not know a little bit of the history. I'll just go over a little bit brief history of that. Is the turn of the century, they were trying to figure out not only how to get us away from the land, but there was a policy called Kill the Indian and Save the Man. And in that policy was to remove us, not just from our culture and our language, but also from our homelands. And they did it at a young age. They kidnapped our children at a young age and coming through the reservations, and they could be playing outside and just kidnap them. Just out of the blue, you come out and there's no more kids there. And my uncle, who had just passed, a few months ago, was one of the young children that was kidnapped out of Yerington, Nevada, into Carson City. And he was 6 years old, I was told, and he ran all the way back. And also my grandma and my aunt went to boarding school. My grandma, she went at a different time. Some of the times were extremely hard because it was militarized. And a lot of the young men during those times went into the military. They weren't even citizens, and they went into the military fighting for this country. That's what the country, had programmed them to try to do. But their DNA brought them back home. And many of them were fighting in ways to protect our homelands, our community, and try to articulate what they were seeing. Now, my tribe here is in the middle of the military industrial complex. And so we have, in history, the tribes that were at war with the United States, trying to protect their homelands from invaders, usually those militaries would set up forts right next to them. And so you'll have things like Fort Yates, Fort McDermott, different places. That just a little bit of history for you guys, to share with you why are military bases by tribes. The other thing that the government was trying to do was they relocated a lot of Native people to different homelands. Sometimes those homelands were extremely poor and no water and no food source. And it was really to claim as the land theft from, we'll give an example of like Reno, Nevada, for example. That's Paiute territory all through there. It was a place where there was an abundance, wetlands, food source, fish. The Black Hills is another example. Wampanoag territory out in Martha's Vineyard is another one where you have a whole bunch of rich people out there. The Obamas, for example. Um, so this is just a little bit of overview again of the history and why we're protecting the sacred. It's a time where it seems like the water here in Nevada, the contamination during those times when our people were kidnapped and taken to the city, they come back home and they help us articulate some of the things from the Western culture and language. And there is a benefit sometimes with that, because when they come back, they now know the words are like smoke. And when I say the words are like smoke, it's the United States government has not honored one treaty with the indigenous people here in Americas, not one. And they did try to indoctrinate. They did try to kill the innocence of the man with the language, but it didn't work. And some of our relatives, it did. They became great Christians. Oh, they love Jesus. And, you know, they're going to get really disturbed when they find out Jesus is not white. That's going to be the other big poof. So history is in the making, and we are correcting it the best we can with humor, laughter, a lot of love, a lot of healing. And these drones are documenting that healing. They're documenting that what needs to be healed in the land, from dams, mega dams, from geothermal plants, from the next wave of the Green New Deal, which is when I think of that, I think about like mining and all of the water they got to use. And when it comes to lithium and the different minerals they're going to have to extract, where's that toxin going to go? Not only that, after they get those batteries, you know, where they're going to go in 5, 10, 15, 20 years when they're no good, they're going to have to go into some landfill somewhere. And so there's some consequences to that. This is why I'm trying to push to help our young people articulate this negative energy. And when they start to articulate why I don't have my language, why don't I live in my homelands, why do I live in the city, then I can help them reconnect and share with them that they can reconnect. And sometimes when they come home, our people aren't so welcoming because we're in fight or flight mode. There's very limited resources. And as COVID really showed, the federal government had to get sued by tribes to release the funds to help the tribes. The most vulnerable in the United States are tribes. And the homeless, the veterans, I mean, there is the violence against women. There's so much happening here. And many of you guys out there don't know that the federal government, this administration, had sent tribes body bags instead of PPE. So we got a lot to continue to push forward and do it with a good heart and in a good way, regardless of who's at the other end, who's receiving it the way they receive it. We have no choice but to move forward. There is no other choice to move forward and create a better future for our children the best way we possibly can. So this project, Drones for Good, is going to be pretty much in my own homelands for now during this pandemic. And it's going to document all the different areas that we've been encroached through the years with 180 years of occupation, invasion from military, 61 years of invasion from military. We have a bombing range that's been bombing for decades. Live munition comes through our homelands almost every other day. The ground shakes from the bombing around, it's a little less than 10 miles away from my house. And we have a high rate of cancer in our area. We no longer have surface water that's drinkable. Our food source is 100% gone. The agay, trout, in Agaipa, trout water, which is the colonized name, is called the Walker Lake, Nevada. You can Google it, next to Hawthorne, Nevada, which used to be the largest military munition on the planet base. It's also the homeland to the Paguidacara, which there is no more Pagwidakata. I don't even know if there's an descendant of the last. They were massacred in the area from an elder that shared, Harold Miller. He had passed on now. He had shared the story. He says that band is completely gone, called Pagwidakata. That means the smaller fish. They ate the smaller fish, which is like the brook trout. They're really not that small, but compared to the fish that used to be in the lake, they could grow up to be 3-4 feet long. They were huge. And we got pictures of them hanging off horseback. Amazing. We no longer have that food source in our homeland. No longer do we have trout in our lake. We have one more lake left, which is Pyramid Lake, that does have trout. Beautiful lake. It's amazing. Google it. Look at it from Google Earth, and it's just an amazing, beautiful lake. It's a pyramid there. It has stories that reach all the way down to the Aztecs and the Mayans. The stories are correlating, predating Western contact. You can still see the water table in the mountains during the time of the floods, during the time when the water was high, during the time when the Ice Age came through. During those times, we have stories when we used to walk along the top of the mountains. A lot of oral tradition. So, relatives, I'm going to continue to push the envelope with this app and see where it goes and see how it pushes forward, see how it educates, to see which audiences it reaches, and to see what I can do with helping to heal the DNA of both Indigenous people and Americans. And when I say Americans, pretty much that means all the United States, because there's a lot of people that just this is all they have. They're not going to be able to go back to Europe because they don't know where their homeland is. They've never even set foot in their own homelands. Our ancestors are stacked on top of each other here, so we need to think of each other as human beings. We would say the traditional word would be Namaga, which is all the people. But there's got to be accountability. Honor your forefathers' promises to the Indigenous people. We should not be struggling this hard. We should not have to spend our life worrying about going to jail, protecting our pine nut trees, or taba, our pine nuts, or our water, or the livelihood of just our fish, or our deer, or antelope, or just a plant, our traditional medicines. We shouldn't have to worry if we're trespassing in our own homelands, because we are. So this is just a little bit of 101 through Indigenous eyes. Tabo Yadawa, which is, I'm saying it in English. That's what I said in actually my language, Paiute. Tabo Yadawa is a white man's language. It's English. Nimishinami, which is my thoughts. Tabo Yadawa. I'm saying it to you in English, my thoughts. And if you guys have questions, inbox me. You can also sign up on digitalsmokesignals.com. How do you want to support? You can log into digitalsmokesignals.com. There's a way to support on there. And, using these drones for good, the goal is really to help empower people to use them for good as well. And to continue to share and continue to educate and to continue to empower, but also heal from the historical trauma and the guilt that comes through when you find out of the original history and the original people are still here. Now, mind you, there's so many people I've met as I travel throughout the United States and around the world. It seems that people around the world know we're still here. It's you guys in America that don't. It's like a blind eye. And you know where that comes from? It comes from the invisibility in media. That's where it comes from. I'll go back to that part where I share with you guys the history. It's not a proud history on the American dream here. The American Holocaust is along the way. Land theft, land extraction, missing murdered Indigenous women, legal kidnapping of our children into the foster care system, our young men into juvenile detention centers, our men into the prisons without legal representation. This is the challenge. We can't afford that. To get into a Western court with a non-native judge, non-native jury, non-native representation, non-native law that does not protect the land, the water, and the sacred, or hunting rights, or the promises through treaty that doesn't honor it. That's our challenge here. And we can't even use our traditional names. It can be anything in this world except Paiute. It can be a doctor, lawyer, attorney. But when I want to be Paiute, that's the hardest thing to do. And this is where we struggle. And there'll be a lot more I'll talk about down the road. I really want to just help you guys understand that right now, in our homelands, we're struggling with COVID. In my tribe, we shut down the school this week, and just today we got a message that our only store got shut down from COVID as well. And so we don't have any source of income in our community that is self-generated. So it's forced through grants, and our land base is contaminated on the outside. The water is contaminated. Our food source is contaminated. We're in a pandemic. Can you imagine if we had our fish? We could have at least our one food source. But all these things are the challenges that are one of many communities, like the Navajo Nation, for example, have to endure and go through. And some of those areas don't have water. Fortunately, in our area, in my tribe, we have our kaiva, our mountain, which is where our water tank is, and there's nothing on that mountain. So it's a clean source of water that we have. It's Pijapa, and right now I would say it's Puhapa, which is good water. It's medicine water. Numagapa, it's our water, and that's where we are today, using drones for good, to protect the water, protect the sacred, protect the land for future generations, the unborn, this generational impact that we're experiencing right now. And I don't think COVID is going to be here, just going to poof, it's going to be gone. So it's going to be really interesting next, 6 months to see what's going to happen. Let's take care of each other, show each other compassion, empathy in ways. There's a lot of people struggling, and we can continue to help and empower. On Digital Smoke Signals Facebook, I did a call out, which I got them on the other side of me is a bunch of boxes, which I've been able to hand out in our community, of mask makers and crowdsourcing solutions to make masks. That was during the time when our tribes were getting denied the federal funding and the PPE. So we had to create a solution where there was a problem. You guys came forward, and all throughout the United States, and there was I met some really amazing people that have groups of elders, groups of tribes, tribal members. Different tribes were making masks and already preparing for the pandemic, because they knew that the funding would not hit the tribes right away. They knew we would be the last on the list to get PPE. And so we were able to take care of each other right away. And so that was a blessing. And that's where we're going. We are self-supporting, we are self-reliant, and we have no choice. So what I try to do is really teach our land defenders and water protectors on how to be self-reliant. What can you do, and supporting them as well, as I try to help them get a Patreon or a site on social media where they can try to become professionals in their field. And with the young people being able to articulate the language, it's hard to come into your community and find jobs that aren't in this type of field. There's no tech jobs. There's no drone pilot jobs. There's not a budget for social media. Usually the guy that does the website is also the bus driver, or he might even be on council, or the IT, the graphic design artist, the web developer, and also is a parent. And that's how jack of all trades, master of none. That's how we all are here in our own homelands, because we have to be. And we are dependent on each other in a good way. And I think that's what I love about being Paiute and being Agaitaka and being Nimanawa, is the best of both worlds. We say we walk in two worlds. We walk in our indigenous world, we walk in the white man's world. So with that, relatives, thank you for chiming in. I'm going to continue to use this platform. I'm going to see how it goes. And right now I use the mobile platform. The next one I'm going to go to is the desktop platform. I'm going to get some videos together of the areas that I've been droning. And I get up early in the morning. I like to rise with the sun. I like to go, we say Nanishtai. That's Nanishtai, your breath. You talk to the creator with your breath. And I love to go watch the sunrise and then also send the drone up and just do amazing sunrise photography and feeding my spirit. I like to feed my spirit, to give the things to my spirit that I need. And being a drone pilot is one of those things where you're able to feed your spirit way high up there. So the drone is called Quina Puni'i. We teach you some Paiute today, all right? Quina Puni'i, which is eagle eye. Quina Puni'i, eagle eye. And when you look at this drone, and it says, what does it say right there? The world is watching. Quina Puni'i. The world is watching. We are not doing nothing wrong in our own homelands. We're flying drones to protect, to document, and to also use what we have to protect the sacred. Drones can be used in so many different ways. I'm also using drones for augmented reality, using drones for 360 pictures to be able to document those areas that you can use with 360 with VR, virtual reality, trying to create a solution. It's not the answer, but it is a solution to the problem right now. And it's a way I can get our young people to be involved and to be creative. They don't see the boundaries. They just need access. If there's no access, then they have a hard time pushing through their own hardships. And so I've been working with youth for 20 years, at-risk youth, the teen suicide, violence against women, sexual abuse, addiction, and just trying to language and culture and empower our students, our indigenous young people, to prepare them, because the challenges that they get, it comes from a circle of violence in this country that was introduced to us through colonialism and through indoctrination. And as we all are moving into this next stage of globalization and this deep and heavy paradigm shift. And so the things that we see on social media are just bombarding are probably keeping you, glued to it. This is not the answer, this live stream. Disconnect from it for a while, feed your spirit. I'm not going to try to put everything on digital, but a lot of this is on the ground. And a lot of this is traveling to these places and checking them out too, and looking at what's there, what animals are there, if there's any birds there, looking at the Mother Earth, the moisture, the relative humidity, the RH level. There's a lot of things that go into just describing some of the things I'm sharing with you. There's a lot of things I think about before I'm there. Also acknowledging the land that I'm on, saying a prayer, a blessing, acknowledging, making sure the drones for good is really to make sure that we are not stepping on these sacred areas that are burial sites, that are sacred sites, not disturbing the lands. And it's getting smaller and smaller as more and more immigrants are coming in from around the world. Now, I don't consider our relatives that are crossing the border immigrants, because they're our relatives. They're indigenous people that were colonized by the conquistadors. And the first immigrants came off of the Mayflower. Those were the first immigrants. And we have people from around the world coming in. So don't get those things confused. Those are our relatives. They're indigenous. And that's how we see them in our creation stories. They're indigenous in our creation stories. They're indigenous in our songs. They're indigenous to this land. And that's how we see them. You also are indigenous to this land. Somewhere around the world, your ancestors are indigenous. So these are good things to think about. We think of them in a good heart, good mind, good way. Be a good relative to each other. We might not be related, so be a good human being. In a good way. That means go in a good way. Bija Tumia, go in a good way. All right, guys, you take care, and that's the time. Bija Tumia. Oh, now let's try to get. There we go.